Trump is back. And if you're rich, run a business, thinking about retirement, or have serious money invested in the markets, you are probably wondering, what does this actually mean for me? Because love him or hate him, one thing is absolutely undeniable. Markets move when Trump is in power. Up and down, just like they've been doing this week. Some people win and other people lose. But the difference all comes down to knowing what actually might be coming. So in this video today, I'll show you what changes might be around the corner, and more importantly, how do you make sure that you're on the right side of them? So, to get started, we need to talk about what Trump has actually promised, because in just his first 50 days, he's already signed more executive orders than any president in modern history, and each of these signatures could potentially be worth millions to those who understand what may really be happening. Back in November, Trump made one of his boldest claims yet. He said that he'd end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office. But January 21st came and went, and the war didn't end. February passed, and the war is still going on. This pattern of big promises, followed by mixed delivery, is exactly what you need to potentially understand about Trump's second term. Because when it comes to your money, knowing which of Trump's policies will actually stick and which might fizzle out is going to be everything. And Trump has wasted no time at all in making big moves. He's already signed off on what he calls the largest deportation effort in American history. If mass deportation actually happens at scale, labor costs are going to skyrocket as businesses struggle to fill roles. Higher wages mean lower margins, and companies that rely heavily on immigrant labor could see profits squeezed fast. And then there's energy. Trump is fast-tracking drilling, rolling back environmental rules, and pulling the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement yet again. For oil and gas investors, this basically means Christmas has come early. More drilling, fewer regulations, higher profit, it's all lining up. But if you've got money in renewables, this could be a problem. Federal subsidies, incentives that have helped clean energy grow, could be gone before you know it. And then we've got trade. Trump is bringing back tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, and potentially the EU. This means that if you run a business that relies on these imported goods, electronics, cars, raw materials, your costs are about to skyrocket. But Trump isn't just focused on money. He's shaking up the cultural and corporate landscape as well. His administration is already scrapping diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. It's rolling back LGBTQ protections and legally redefining gender as strictly just male or female. But, of course, with Trump, it's never just about policy, it's also personal. Because just before taking office, he launched his own meme cryptocurrency, Trump, and within weeks it hit a $6 billion market cap. If that tells us anything, it's that his presidency is just as much about influence, branding, and power as it is about policy. But for all the executive orders and dramatic policy shifts, the real question is which of these changes will actually stick? Because as we've seen already, not everything does. And that brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, who Trump has surrounded himself with. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the president's agenda is only as strong as the people carrying it out. Now, if you were expecting a room full of traditional politicians and career bureaucrats, think again. Instead, Trump has brought a mix of making America great again loyalists, media personalities, and a few wildcard picks that have already raised a few eyebrows. Marco Rubio is now handling foreign policy as Secretary of State. Just a few years ago, he was calling Trump a con artist on live TV. Now he's in charge of foreign relations, trade deals, and global diplomacy. That's a massive shift, and whether he has real power or just a title remains to be seen. Then there's Paul Hesketh, the former news host, now running the US military as Secretary of Defense. He's been a vocal supporter of Trump and a critic of traditional Pentagon leadership, but running a primetime news segment is very different from running the world's largest military. And if you thought that was an unconventional pick, well, it gets even more interesting with Elon Musk. Yes, Elon Musk has been brought in to slash government waste. What does that even mean? Well, no one's really sure just yet, but Musk has spent years blasting government inefficiency and now has an actual seat around the table. If he goes all in on cost-cutting, federal agencies could be facing serious shake-ups with entire programs on the chopping block. Then there's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., an anti-vaccine advocate who spent years attacking the pharmaceutical industry, and now he's in charge of health policy. That's already causing panic in certain circles because we're talking about a guy who's openly challenged vaccine safety, and now he's making the decisions that could reshape public health policies entirely. But here's the part that really matters. Trump has always valued loyalty over expertise. His first term proved that if you step out of line, you're gone very fast. Just ask Anthony Scaramucci, who lasted 10 days as Trump's communication director before getting fired, or the dozens of officials who got the boot after disagreeing with him. One moment you're in the inner circle, making big decisions. The next you're out, publicly humiliated and replaced by somebody potentially more loyal. So, why does this matter? Because these are the people who will decide what actually happens over the next 4 years. The promises, the policies, the economic shifts, it all depends on who's still standing when the dust settles down. And if that sounds dramatic, it's because it is. Trump's way of governing has always been different. Let's go back to Trump's first term for just a second. At a NATO summit in 2018, he stood in front of European leaders and accused them of freeloading off the US. Then he threatened to pull out of NATO altogether. That's something no other president has ever seriously considered. At the time, nobody knew whether to take him seriously. Was this a real ultimatum? Or was it just another headline-grabbing stunt? Turns out it didn't matter. By the time the dust settled, European countries had already agreed to increase their defense spending. And that brings us to the first rule of how Trump governs. He starts big, and then he forces a reaction. Now, if you've ever read The Art of the Deal, you'll notice that this is his go-to strategy. He doesn't start where most politicians do. Instead of aiming for a reasonable middle ground, he throws out an extreme position, something that makes headlines. He's proposed things like annexing Greenland or making Canada the 51st state. Not because they're actual plans, but because he wants to set the tone on how he wants to negotiate in the future. And surprisingly, this strategy often works. Because when you start at an extreme, any compromise still leaves you ahead. But it's not just about making bold claims, it's also about keeping everyone on edge. Think about how he handles things like trade wars. One day he's talking about great relations with China, and the next he slaps them with a massive tariff, sending markets into chaos. For business leaders, that kind of unpredictability is an absolute nightmare. It means that you can't plan long term, because one little policy change could wipe out your strategy overnight. And that's the second thing to understand about Trump. He loves to keep people guessing. By constantly shifting positions, he forces everyone around him to react into him instead of the other way around. Now, if you follow Trump long enough, you'll know that there's one thing he never does, and that is to admit defeat. Let's take the many legal battles, for example. Most politicians might try to settle quickly, avoid the bad press, and just move on with their lives, but not Donald Trump. When faced with lawsuits, he never backs down and in fact escalates the situation. He does more appeals, more countersuits, and more public attacks. Even when the odds are against him, he never ever concedes without a fight. And that brings us on to his third principle. Always double down whenever challenged. For Trump, conflict isn't something to avoid, it's all just part of the game. He believes that the more you push back, the more you control the narrative. And that's why, when you look at his teams, his policies, and the way he runs things, one thing is absolutely clear. This isn't going to be a quiet, steady administration. Instead, it's going to be a fast, aggressive, and constantly shifting landscape. Which brings us on to the big question. What does all of this actually mean for your money? When Trump won, the market had a very mixed reaction. Stocks went up because investors liked the idea of tax cuts and fewer regulations. But at the same time, bond yields rose, which signaled worries about inflation and possible trade wars. And honestly, that pretty much sums up the financial impact of his return. Some excitement, some uncertainty, and a lot of noise. But here's what most financial experts won't tell you. Presidents actually matter far less for your wealth than you might think. Just look at this chart, which shows the returns of US equities during previous US presidential terms. Yes, Trump's policies will shake things up in different industries. We've seen it all before. Energy and defense stocks soared during his first term, whilst tech and companies that are relying on global trade had a much tougher time. And the same thing is going to happen again. Some industries will win, some will lose. But the entire market as a whole will keep on rolling forwards. Because in the long run, it's not politics that drives the market, it's things like innovation, productivity, and company earnings. At the end of the day, political cycles last just 4 years, but building wealth takes decades. It makes sense to adjust your portfolio where needed, but completely changing your investment strategy because of who's in office is exactly how you lose money. So, what's the smartest way to handle Trump's second term? Well, to stay highly diversified, invest in the great companies of the world, and use market swings to your advantage. Because let's be real, presidents come and go, but great businesses keep on growing. And in the end, your success as an investor comes down to staying in the market, not reacting to headlines. And I've put together a complete guide that shows you exactly how to implement these principles in today's market, which you can download for free using the link in the description. However, when it comes to your success as an investor, the truth is most investors lose money regardless of who's in office. So check out this video next, where I reveal why 98% of investors lose money and the simple strategy to make sure that you're in the 2% who win.